I'm inspired by you guys. I've been following you for a long time, and you know, your resources are how I've been building my cases. So the feeling is definitely mutual. Thank you for having me.
Oh, fantastic. That's good to know.
Well, that was really touching. I had no idea. That's amazing. This is Baehr, Kristina.
Hi.
Howdy.
So I'll go ahead and intro the podcast. I thought you guys were going to jump into a natural organic conversation. I didn't want to miss it because I just loved the direction that it was going, but I'll go ahead and intro you. Welcome to the Exposing Mold podcast. My name is Keely Severson, and I am here with my co-hosts Eric Johnson and Alicia Swami. Today we are interviewing attorney Kristina Baehr. Kristina, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I was just saying that I've been following y'all for a long time, and as I was looking for resources for my own family and also building our cases, you were right up there, and the experts that you've had on the podcast and the resources you've pointed to on Instagram. I'm a big fan, so I'm really honored to be here.
For those who aren't familiar, Kristina was recently featured on a news clip where they did a summary of your story. Kristina, would you mind sharing that summary for us?
Sure. So a little over a year ago, I finally got a mycotoxin test back for my own health. I had been sick for a long time, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, like so many of your listeners and viewers, I'm sure. And I finally went to this concierge practice that gave me a mycotoxin test, and my scores were through the roof. And I started reading about it, and I just thought, oh man, this is what's been happening with my family. And so, you know, what do you do, right? I'm start Googling, trying to figure out all the information that I can. I hire a mold inspector. The first one took an air sample in the middle of the room and looked around the house and said, looks pretty good to me. Good construction, looks like a nice house. Like, you're probably not exposed here. And by the grace of God, this other inspector named Tim Taylor happened to not get my voicemail canceling his appointment. And he showed up, and I, let him do a second inspection because I didn't want to ruin his day. And he said, tell me about your family. And I think that that's just how every mold inspection should begin, right? How rare is that? But anyway, he said, tell me about your family. And I told him about my daughter, who had been having really extreme mood swings. And he took a sample right by her wall because he said it often is found in the walls of the kids who are most affected. And he found Stachybotrys and opened up the wall, and then the rest is history. That was just the tip of the iceberg.
Wow, that's pretty, pardon me, pretty intense. And I'm just really curious because you said you had gotten a mycotoxin urine test and you're testing your home. Did the samples match from your urine test to what was found in your home?
Yes, ours did. Mm-hmm. Ours did. Behind her wall was Stachybotrys, but then we found enormous amounts of Chitomium in our kitchen. And then we found Aspergillus and other mycotoxins and other molds and mycotoxins in our HVAC. And so in this house, I like to say it was where our babies bathed. We had a huge swath under their bathtub. It's where they slept. It's where we ate. And it was the air we breathed. I mean, it was everywhere.
Sounds like you were being exposed to a lot of these trichothecene producing mycotoxins, which we know are extremely, extremely dangerous and actually usually do not show up on tests. So the fact that they even showed up is a major, major red flag. And so you had talked about your daughter and she was having mood swings. Were there other symptoms that you guys were dealing with, or was it only just you and your daughter? Or maybe you could talk more about that.
Yeah, so you start peeling back the layers, right? I mean, I had had migraines for years. Years prior, I'd had these migraines that wouldn't go away. And then I had night sweats, and and just extreme exhaustion. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. I mean, I was telling people and telling doctors that I felt drunk in the middle of the day. I couldn't think straight or see straight. And of course, everybody tells you that it's just stress, right? I mean, if you just reduce stress in your life, right? And at the time I was working at a big law firm and managing really big, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cases. And they thought it was the stress. And so I actually quit that job thinking that it was the stress. And I mean, you quit the job, you start exercising, you start eating better. I eliminated gluten, I eliminated dairy. Like I'm just, on a quest for health because I knew that if I'm healthy, I'm going to be a better mom, going to be a better, and I knew something was wrong with me. And the problem was I was doing all of that and I wasn't getting better. And that's when I found this concierge practice that gave me the mycotoxin test. So then I'm starting to think about the rest of my family. And my son, Scott, while we were home during the quarantine, when schools were shut down, he had started regressing in his developmental milestones and he was running into walls. And so he had big bruises all over his forehead and he was melting down for an hour a day. And I had started working at home at that time, like the rest of America. And I'm just hearing these screams from downstairs. I'm like, what is going on? And then my older daughter having these extreme mood swings, extreme anxiety. She's having her own health issues. And so I just got everybody into therapy. I mean, not knowing, right? So my son's doing speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy. I'm taking time out to do therapy with him every single day. And then my daughter, I get her into therapy. So she's in occupational therapy. Then they learned she had vision processing disorder. So she's getting vision therapy, right? I'm going to Evan and I are going to a family therapist to work on parenting these circumstances because the kids are kind of going insane, right? But we don't know that there is a root cause to all of it. So once I started reading about mycotoxin, it was like, oh, this is what's been going on to our family. And no wonder it all lined up, right? All those symptoms started getting worse and worse and worse when we were shut into a toxic home. And so that's, when we got the high scores from our house, I was like, we got to get out of here. And so we packed 4 laundry baskets and a friend thankfully gave us a house that she wasn't using. And not everybody has that. We were so, so, so blessed. Because at first you think, where are you going to go? I mean, have you met my children? They're insane, right? They're insane. They're insane. I can't just go move with my 4 kids somewhere. And the mold affects your brain. You can't make decisions. And, but a friend gave us her house and we left and we haven't been back.
Wow, just you telling your story, I could just feel it. It's just shaking me to the core because your story is like so many others.
Yes, I mean, I am not alone. I feel like it's silly for me to even say it out loud because it's what every one of you have been through yourselves. It's what your listeners and viewers have been through. You're living it right now, so many of you, and have been living it for years, And when I first moved out, I thought we're out and we're better. It's going to be better. And I think like so many others, we learned that that's only the beginning because we moved into a brand new rental and that rental developed its own problem. And we're now so much more sensitized to it that we got sick again. And I took my whole family up to upstate New York. And that was last summer. And that's when I started really diving into the research and the science and found you and found some community amongst people who other families who have been there, right? Because you feel so alone and you also think it's a one-time thing and then it's over. And then you learn that it's a lifelong journey.
Absolutely. And that's why we started exposing mold. Initially it was just to kind of get the word out there and get the information out there. But now it's like we're taking it to a whole other level where we're like you, Kristina, we're hypersensitive, and it's not just enough to get out. There are specific steps and strategies you have to implement in order to make sure that you're actually going to be healing and not perpetuating your illness and getting worse through hypersensitivity. So that's why we had launched recently an educational group to provide that information to anyone who's interested, anyone who's been injured. But I really want to shift gears here, and I want to talk about you. You're big time, girl. You're
I mean, overnight. I don't know. I don't know. It's just like I had no idea that it was going to blow up the way that it did. I mean, I just was starting a little law firm with one paralegal. I mean, I've had hundreds of calls.
Yeah,
And
I mean, going from a national trial lawyer and, to obtaining these major royalties in your cases to now this opportunity has just sprung from this tragic story that, you've experienced and many others have experienced. And like, we've been looking for you, you're like, you're in the corner of Robert McKee. We had Robert McKee on earlier in the year,
yes,
and I mean, his story was so amazing, and he's doing great work for people who have been mold injured. But to see like more litigators like you popping up and really like committed and devoted to helping, because you know what you went through, and so many people are currently going through it and they don't know what to do because no one else knows what to do. And so the more we band together, like today, talking about our stories and talking about our tragedies turned opportunities, it's so important, that we do our best to help others. And thank you so much for being awesome. And maybe you could talk about the law firm that you built, Just Well Law, and what's been going on so far.
So, you said, I wish that there were more of you. I mean, I wish that there was one of me when I was really hurting. And I mean, not that we're not hurting now, like we're still very much in the midst of it. And will be, it's going to be a journey for everybody. But I could not get another plaintiff's lawyer to take my call. And the only other lawyer in this area who does mold work handles wrongful death claims. That is insane. You have to die to get representation. I mean, literally, like you have to die to get representation. He would not take my call, wouldn't even return my voicemail or my email. And it's like, I'm another lawyer. Wouldn't you just spend 15 minutes with me talking to me about my case and just helping me figure out how to do this? So I hired a great friend, an hourly lawyer. And then I started, doing the research and the science myself. And finally, of course, when you get plugged into community, you learn that there are others out there. And Karen Ferris in Texas is a wonderful litigator. And then I found Bob McKee and found his direct email on a pleading, because I needed to get past the staff, right? Like I needed to get directly to the lawyer. And he started just consulting on my case for free. And I would call and he'd be like, how's my favorite Texan, and then he would just advise me about, and we'd shoot the shit about all the things in a mold law case. And I ended up hiring him for my case to be co-counsel with the other team that I had built. And he's just magical. And we're working together now because I was in Florida working on my own case when this story came out, and he and I were like, I was getting an inquiry on my website every 3 minutes. And we thought we need to work together and figure out how we can help more people. But I have built the law firm that I couldn't find. I want to be the lawyer that I couldn't find for my own family. That's what this is for. And I just see such a need for it. And every day I'm more and more convinced that this is what I should be doing. But we're a startup. So I'm just like, figuring it out as I go. How do I help more people? I wake up every day, like, how do I help more people? and looking through the inquiries and trying to get back to every single person, because nobody got back to me, right? And I just want every single person to have an opportunity to talk to me, or I hired a wonderful intake director, Casey McCurry, who's also a mold survivor, so that you can call our office and you can have guidance from people who have been there, right? And like you, I don't have it all figured out. I'm on the journey and I'm learning every day. But I want to share the resources I have and what I've learned about how to build a case. And, if I can't help you, you're in some other state, I want to point you in the right direction. And because I think, as you know, survivors, we're on a mission, right? And we want to help each other. And there's zero competition. It's just, it's an open playing field because there's nobody else out there. But it's also, when you're in it for the right reason, it's a mission, right?
I totally agree with you. I often feel, waking up daily and working on exposing mold, like there's an energy flowing through me that is doing the work, and I am just the person to carry it out. I'm not a super religious person, and I don't subscribe to any one belief, but I just feel like there is some sort of energy that is pushing me to do this. And that's why, maybe we were all injured for a reason, and we were strong enough to deal with it and figure it out, and and also privileged enough to have the resources to go ahead and pursue something and do something about it. And Keely, I really would love for Keely to tell her story about when she was injured and how, like you, she couldn't find anyone, and just kind of dropped the ball. And so I would love to steer the conversation over to Keely to just describe her situation, and maybe we can talk more about what you're doing for mold injured families to seek restitution from their injuries.
Yeah.
Well, I think, Kristina, you summarized it perfectly. There are not that many lawyers that are versed in this and on the right side of this. I think most of the environmental lawyers are actually arguing on the other side of mold can't hurt you that bad, and it's not that big of a deal, and it's everywhere.
That's right.
So, I mean, that was our situation. We had a lawyer, but he took the case on contingency because he thought it was a slam dunk, and then he left the case because he was offered another job. And it's just really nice to hear that there's lawyers like you up and coming that will be there to help other people. Because I think,
and I'm taking over some of those cases where the lawyers just let the cases languish,
Good.
And it's horrible. It's horrible. And I think sometimes it's because they don't know and they get kind of overwhelmed with the science, and it's not that hard to prove. But I'm so sorry that you had that experience. I hate hearing that about other lawyers, and
it happens, and it's part of life. I'm probably the most resilient person I know. So I'm happy that you're on board for the other people who are going to need access to great lawyers who are willing to fight for the truth. And I hope that exposing mold can be a support for any work that you do in the future, whether it's access to researchers or publicizing things or backing up science, really just anything that we can support you with. I would love to be and honored to be part of the work, because I feel like as more cases are proved in a court of law, we might be able to inch towards a little bit more progress on the legality of some of this.
I think that's right. Yeah. I want there to be, this is about so much more than me.
Right.
I want to raise up an army of lawyers to represent families around the country. I mean, I think my story resonates so much with people, not just in the mold community, but also outside the mold community, because it can happen to anybody, right? I made Bob at this deposition yesterday begin the deposition by reading my son's essay about losing his home and watching his brother in therapy. And it was like, for me, it was just a message to the other lawyers of, this could happen to you, like, I am one of you. This could be your family. right? And I had never heard of mycotoxins. I didn't even know that that was a thing. Like toxic mold, it's like out of a sci-fi movie. And I continually pinch myself, am I really doing this with my life? This is just so outside the realm of what I ever thought I could do. But what I think I bring to the table is the privilege, as you mentioned, of my background is like, you can't label me a wacko. I'm not a wacko. I'm just like a, relatively nerdy, smart person who got poisoned by the people who built my house and did a bad job, like, and they're not bad people. They just, they're not bad people. They're good people, but they cut corners that led to water intrusion, that led to microbial growth, that poisoned my family, right? And like, that's not, we can talk about next if you want how to prove a mold case, but it's not hard, right? Like asking, let's say a roofer, hypothetically, omitted a critical part of the house, of the roof, hypothetically. Roofer, you know that water intrusion causes harm, right? And you know that this mistake or this intentional omission is going to cause water damage, right? And you also know that water damage can cause mold, and mold can poison people, right? So,
well, I think the main thing you have to nail them on is if somebody knows that their neglect and their poor job is right now resulting in harm, that's when it crosses over from considering this to be just water damage into a health crisis.
Yes, Eric, you're right. I mean, that I would call battery. It's the intentional infliction of bodily harm, right? The cases I'm getting every day are the landlord just came in and painted over it. I mean, these military families, right? These military contractors just come in and they paint over it. They know what the root of the problem is. There's an entire community in Florida where they just forgot to put in vapor barriers. But every family calls and says, I have a mold problem. And they come and they clean the air ducts, right? Which only makes people sicker. And they never address the root of the problem, which is the same in every single damn house, which is that they built this entire community without vapor barriers. Someone needs to be held accountable for that, right? This is an intentional omission. You know that these houses are making people sick, and you're continuing to just, the equivalent of painting over it and letting them continue to suffer. That's battery. That's intentional infliction of bodily harm.
Yeah, you said something that really resonated with me, in that a lot of us that tangled with the killer toxic black mold use the identical words. We say the same thing over and over again. We go to a doctor and say, doctor, I feel like I've been hit by a truck.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctor never asks, well, was it a Mack truck or was it a Kenworth?
Yeah.
And I know that seems a little silly, but an F-150 is not the same as a Peterbilt. And even though they can both do serious bodily damage, if you get hit with a Kenworth, I mean, you got slammed by something that is so overwhelming that this is not your plain, ordinary garden variety, mold. It's a special situation. And that's what we were dealing with in the original chronic fatigue syndrome outbreak. We went to doctors and said, there is something here that is so bad, it is off the charts. And I mean, it was a big truck.
Yeah.
And we followed up on it, and it was Stachybotrys.
Right. Yeah. No, I've heard you speak about that before, Eric, and that's so powerful. Yeah. I mean, how many people out there just are so sick and they don't know why? And in these military communities, you go and you say, I feel like I've been hit by a truck, and I've been reading about our homes, and is my home toxic? And the military doctors literally will look them right in the face and say, oh, no.
And they're going, oh, no, that was just an F-150. That was just a little truck. It wasn't that bad.
I mean, you know, have you been exercising lately? Have you been sleeping enough? Like, that's the answers that they're getting. I mean, it's, at least in my case, the doctors that I was going to, they were good doctors and they were trying their best. They just didn't have mold in their toolbox. And that's one reason I kind of want to talk more and shout it from the rooftops, because I want doctors to hear the message too, right? I know you do too. We all just want our professionals to know what's going on when to help people get better, right?
So your opposition is basically trying to make the case that it was no big deal. All mold is pretty much the same. So if you were injured by mold, we can't really consider this to be a special, extremely hazardous case.
Right.
You know, they're going to try to dumb it down in every way possible. Whereas you're trying to say, no, there are certain molds out there that are special, that are toxic, and they create permanent immune damage.
That's right, Eric. And I think that that's a huge point. It's permanent damage. And I think, you know, I was on Fox the other day, and it was KAXN or something, the Austin version. And I'm talking about neurological damage, and I'm talking about what happened to my kids, and I'm like telling my sob story. And then at the end, they put on a screen, mold is known to cause adverse health effects. Mold causes asthma and headaches. And I was like, oh my God. I was like embarrassed to be associated with the story, right? I mean, when I posted it on my Instagram, I cut off the last slide. It's like, for the love of God, this causes neurological and immunological permanent injury. My family is permanently injured. My 3-year-old will never be the same. Like, this is not asthma, or not that asthma isn't bad. Don't get me wrong. I know that asthma can be very severe, but my family doesn't even have asthma. Why are you posting about asthma like after you've heard my story, right? Like, nobody in my family has asthma. We have immunological and neurological injuries that are permanent because we lived in this house for 8 years that was poisoning us the whole time, you know?
Yeah, when the Center for Disease Control saw the immunological damage from the clusters of sick teachers and sick buildings, they did the most amazing thing. It's exactly the same tactic that you were confronted with. They named this syndrome chronic fatigue syndrome. This opened the door for people to say, oh, well, mold causes chronic fatigue, and completely forget about the severe immunological evidence that they were really scared of, and that they didn't want people to look into.
Yeah. And I had a tumor also. And it was real. Like, I collapsed and was taken to the emergency room, and it took a long time for them to figure out that I had severe anemia, and that I had this tumor that needed to be removed. And it's, you know, thankfully by that point I had gotten to a really good doctor who understands mold, and complex. For me, it's diagnosed as complex inflammatory response syndrome. That in itself, as you know, Eric, is a complicated term. Do we need to call it that, or can we call it complex inflammation? I don't know. It's tricky, but I have a serious diagnosis, in addition to other things. And my really wonderful doctor in Austin, Eleanor Womack, explained to me that it's all related to my toxic exposure over that many years. And it manifested in anemia, and in POTS, and in a tumor, and in migraines, and in night sweats, and like all, you know, insomnia, and I can go on, as you all have. So I don't
Dr. Shoemaker came up with the Biotoxin Illness concept based on the idea that he was seeing a similar damage between hysteria and Lyme disease and what was occurring in sick building syndromes. Mm-hmm. It was the structure equals function, in that the specific nature of the toxic exposure, the actual, you know, ion ring, ionophore molecule, was all striking the immune system in the same way, resulting in the same kind of illness. But At the time, he was primarily concerned with toxic mold, Stachybotrys, because that was in the news. That was the one that was scaring everybody.
Oh.
And I had assumed that eventually he was going to link up his biotoxin illness concept with Stachybotrys and insert this into a specific syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, and get research into this. But he kept drifting the other way, drawing in more and more factors, brown recluse spider bites.
Yeah.
Yeah. And finally, it became sort of a toxic soup where no matter what he discovers, if it doesn't link up to something specific, it's of very little value.
Yeah.
So I don't use the I don't use that chronic inflammatory response term because it's devolved into something that is too vague to have any practical value. When the toxic mold illness first emerged, it was because of the discovery of Stachybotrys. That was the first one to make the news in a big way. So when people talked about mold illness, toxic mold illness, the dreaded black mold, they were talking about something extremely specific.
Yeah.
That was the original term, and that's the one I continue to use.
Well, Eric, I don't know if you've had a chance to come across Dr. Jamie Lichtenstein in your research, but when I was trying to figure out the science for my own family and trying to figure out how to meet the legal standard in Texas, which is very high or could be considered high. So I wanted to know, like, well, what does the science say? Besides the Shoemaker folks who are wonderful, don't get me wrong, they're wonderful and have done amazing work, but I wanted to look to academia. I have kind of a bent towards academia. So I wanted to look towards the more academic side to see, is anybody in research institutions and universities thinking and writing about mold? And I found Dr. Lichtenstein, who has been writing about Stachybotrys and the cytokine storm that happens when human cells interact with Stachybotrys. And so I got connected to her and I hired her as a legal expert in my case. And I asked her point blank, does mold cause systemic inflammation? And she said, oh yes, absolutely. And she said it causes this cytokine storm that's very similar to long COVID. And that's why we see some of the same symptoms over time with it's what happens when there's long-term inflammation. And then I said, well, what about neurological damage? And she said, yes, absolutely. And so what she's done for me is she's gone through the literature and cited the studies for, mold causes complex inflammation. And she's got 30 peer-reviewed studies, right? And I think that what I want to do for my cases is really merge the science and the on the integrative side, that these doctors have been treating this for a long time and they have been heroes, right? With some of the more recent academic research to say the science, the academic research really has caught up. The last decade has, and as you guys know, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. You're the ones who are doing so much good in the world by sharing these studies, but the last decade has made enormous strides in the science to prove that toxic mold, and Stachybotrys in particular, but others also, cause neurological harm. They cause immunological harm, and the harm is permanent, right? And so we just need to convince the Foxes of the world. And I was really, really thankful that CNBC included that in their written report. That was really, I was just so thankful because that's what I want people to know, that it doesn't just go away when you move out of your house. It's a lifelong journey that we're on now.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the fact that Stachybotrys exposure is cumulative from a number of different sources means that it's very difficult to prove that whatever happened in your house is the sole cause of your illness. And so you can hold one builder completely liable for the sum total of whatever went on. If you've had any exposures elsewhere, now you've got to prove your way out from under that. So it requires a strong circumstantial case that you didn't have any prior illness, and you have to demonstrate that the presence of this particular mold was at a level high enough and that you had sufficient exposure to result in precisely the type of illness that you're complaining about.
Yeah, no, that's right. But I don't think it's that hard. I don't think it's so we'll see, right? We'll see how my case turns out, how other cases turn out. But Bob's been doing this for a long time and he's been very successful. And I think when you show, like in my case, right, you've got a family who all have very similar symptoms of neurological harm, and then you have pictures of chitomium and Stachybotrys and where it's located, right? Where we were eating, where we were sleeping, where we were bathing, the air we were breathing. And then you show the mycotoxins that are in the HVAC, and those match the mycotoxins in your body. Now you're building a pretty good case for a jury to say, yeah, that makes sense to me. You know,
yeah, like the Melinda Ballard case, where it's so overwhelming that there's no doubt.
Yeah, and you know, I learned about Melinda Ballard early on, and you know, I never, of course, got a chance to meet her, but she's another mold warrior from Texas, and you know, I want to honor her because she was a giant in the legal world and she dedicated her life to this. And you know, I think that since her case, she was not able to prove a personal injury case in Texas. And I think since her case, the science really has caught up. And I think we can meet the standard that she wasn't able to meet in her case. But she was still able to use her personal injuries in her case against the insurance company to say, like, look at the harm that was caused to my family. And that's how she got the $38 million verdict. So she wasn't actually allowed to bring a personal injury case.
Right. So in cases where the evidence is so completely overwhelming, like a complete cluster of sick people in a specific room or in a certain building, then you've got a pretty good circumstantial case.
Mm-hmm.
But I still question what happens to the individual who went from place to place to place and was exposed to Stachybotrys over a long period of time and then had one final exposure that kicked them off. Where does that leave them?
So that's, I think that's a challenging case. And I think that is the most challenging case. I have seen a few of those cases that I would be willing to take where they were exposed and then they were feeling way better and their scores were back to normal and they were feeling great. And we know that they're sensitive because of their prior exposure. And then they go into a home and they get sick again. And their mycotoxins in their body match the mycotoxins in their house, et cetera. I think that's a good case. But when someone's sick and then the first house that made them sick, and then there's another house and a third house and a fourth house, that's more than I'm willing to take on right now. But I think the best, I wanted to tell your viewers kind of what makes a good case, because I'm getting a lot of inquiries. So what makes a good case? Do you have a certified mold inspection from someone legit? And you have to be careful because you don't want to hire someone who's just going to take an air sample in the middle of the room. They need to do dust sampling and air sampling, and they should take the air sampling in a place that is affected, right? Like my daughter's wall was where we found the Stachybotrys. So, and mycotoxin testing. Have they taken mycotoxin testing of their house and of their bodies? And did they test their belongings? And you really need a certified mold inspector if you're going to have a case. You can't do your own ERMI. You need your own certified mold inspector. Okay. Then you need to go find a mold literate doctor and be willing to pursue treatment. And you also need to be willing to leave. And this is really, really, really hard. I've had probably 100 of the people who have called are not able or willing to leave. And I understand because I've been there too. It's really, for some people, it's cost prohibitive. And I get it. Some people are not able to leave. But I unfortunately, and I think any other personal injury lawyer, can't prove that your house is uninhabitable if you're living there. So you just have to make a choice. If you want to bring a case, you can't be living in the environment. So those are really the big things I ask. Do you have mold testing? Are you willing to get medical treatment, and have you gotten medical treatment already? And are you willing to continue? And then are you willing and able to leave? And then the last thing is the statute of limitations, because I've gotten a lot of calls from people who say, and I talked to this girl the other day, y'all, and she's probably listening to this podcast, and she was just the perfect plaintiff. She did all of those things, and she's gotten a huge amount of medical care. She's taken such good care of her body. She had all the videos and the photos and all the things. And she's been looking for a lawyer in Texas for 3 years. And the statute of limitations is 2. And I had to tell her, like, I just wish that I was here 3 years ago listening to this conversation, because I would have taken your case, you know? But the statute of limitations is 2 years in Texas. And then in a lot of other states, it can be 3 or 4 or 2 or even 1. So you just have to know the statute of limitations in your state, and then, you know, make sure you bring a claim within that period of time. And every state is different in terms of when it begins to run. When does that 2 years begin to start? And typically it's when did you know or should have known that you were exposed to mold?
This whole statute of limitations, like where did this come from? Is this state by state? How can the people, like, you know, like us, can we advocate for longer statute of limitations? Like, I don't even know if you have the answers to these questions, but maybe you can elaborate more.
So I think it probably comes from the common law. It's true in any case. There are breach of contract statute of limitations, there's fraud statute of limitations. And it's okay. It's not something, there are other battles we want to fight. This isn't one of them. This is just how the law works. You know, the law protects people from, you can't, you know, years later say that you were harmed by something that happened years ago. It's hard to prove, but also at some point the defendants are off the hook. So let me give you an example where you would be for a statute of limitations, right? I had this case where I was representing these doctors who had invented this really cool drug. And the drug company paid them royalties, $300 million over, I think it was like 15 years. And then the drug company decided that they wanted to stop paying them. So what do? They hire Williams and Connolly, a big firm in Washington, D.C., and they bring a breach of contract claim against the doctors. And they say, well, you know, didn't follow section 4 of the agreement, you know, for all these years. And I was able to get the doctors out of that case by saying, no, there's a statute of limitations here. If they were violating section 4 of this agreement, then they've been doing that for 15 years. And the statute of limitations for a breach of contract claim is 3 or whatever it was in the state. So can you see how that was a fair result? So that's the point of statute of limitations in the law.
Kristina, I have a question about the inspections. I know that in my state of Wisconsin, the statute of limitations for mold cases is 3 years. And I also know of a case where a building biologist did a report with surface sampling, and the report was actually thrown out of court because she wasn't a microbiologist. Do you have specific recommendations when you talk about a certified inspection? What certification are we looking at? Do we want a microbiologist on the scene? Do we want a specific type of certification when we're calling for sampling?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. I don't know. I have to think about that. I think it's probably going to depend on the state. So I have my go-to experts in Texas, who are certified under the Texas licensing requirements. And I know that that's enough here, but I don't know in other states. So I should stay in my lane.
Do you anticipate when you go to court, the defense having a lot of wacky, crazy arguments to discredit you and have any?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, my deposition was 10 hours long. It was the longest deposition that I've ever sat in my entire legal career. I've never been to a deposition that lasted that long. And it was my own. It was over 2 days. The first day went until like 11 p.m. and then it started again the next morning. I mean, what are they even asking about for 10 hours, right? It's ridiculous.
That was emotional to relive all of that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and it's, in these military cases, it's just flat out abusive.
The military cases are some of the worst that I hear about. I mean, those are really, really heartbreaking and a breach and a threat to national security for these people to be living this way.
I mean, that's exactly, yes, it's a national security issue. We can't have our military families sick. And it's like every house. It's not just, I mean, it is a massive issue. But the defense, because I have a series of mold cases and have learned from Bob and Karen and others. And in a general mold case, you just bring the case and, they raise their defenses and you do depositions and then you settle the case, right? Most cases. But in these military cases, it's just a scorched earth, the defense. Every issue has to be litigated. I mean, they have like 10 people on a call, in my case in North Carolina, they want to take 25 depositions. I mean, it's just, it is insane. And they're trying to price out the personal, I mean, my belief is they want to price out the plaintiffs and basically just squelch them because they know that there's like there's endless liability there. Because
when you say price out, do you mean make the cost to proceed so high that it's not attainable to the average person?
Yeah.
Is that what that term means? Okay.
I actually had a lawyer tell me that years ago. We don't actually have to win the case. We just have to prolong it until you give up.
Wow.
And I think that's why so many of mold litigation plaintiffs have given up, because they're, and my own family, right? Like, we've been paying rent in addition to our construction, in addition to our mortgage, in addition to all of the medical bills. I mean, we have begged, borrowed, and, not stolen, but like this was just financially devastating, right? And so, yeah, especially if a lawyer isn't willing to take it on contingency, whereas when I was doing this, no one was, right? Like, no one even returned my call. And I have a big case. I mean, I think I have a really good case. I have clear liability. I have a lot of injuries. Like, so yeah, families aren't able to afford a lawyer, or if they are, they're only able to afford like a demand letter, and then the defendants get away with murder. So what Bob and I are really passionate about is teaching more lawyers how to do these claims so that they can take them on contingency. They can build just the basic elements of the case, which is what caused the mold, are they sick, prove causation, general and specific, and prove damages, and you're done. That's it. I think we can do this. I want more lawyers. If you're a lawyer and you're listening, like, please call me. I want to help you do it. A friend just called me, and he's former JAG, and he lives in New Orleans. And I'm like, there's a lot of mold in New Orleans. You need to join me, and he's coming with me, hopefully, to Hawaii next week, because the Navy has poisoned the water there. You probably read about this for Red Hill, but I'm going to be building a case in Hawaii for military families. And I just need partners, right? Like I'm only one person. So I need partners, and we want to help more lawyers do this everywhere.
Well, I love what you said about building an army of lawyers, because that's what I would also really like to see have a leg in this race. Is it okay if I ask you a personal question before we wrap up?
Mm-hmm.
In watching your news clip, a few things caught my attention, but one of them was specifically something that your husband said. Mm-hmm. It was your health was declining, and he had told the reporter, he essentially told you, you have a high-performing job, just suck it up. This is what it is. And my question to you is, did the exposure affect your marriage at all in a way of getting along or being able to connect with each other and understand each other? Because that was my experience and experiences that I see discussed a lot. And I think I would just love it if you would share if you had the same experience.
So yes, and we are super open about that. We haven't talked about that yet, but I mean, I wasn't a very, I've never been a very angry person. Like I, not that I'm nice all the time or anything, but I never would yell or slam a door or anything until that house. And then suddenly you have like, I'm slamming doors and I'm flying off the handle about things. And I think that he had some of that too. And yeah, and then I don't get into the details of what was going on with some of my kids, but let's just say it was extreme. And yeah, the rage is crazy. But I also think that that's a separate issue, right? Like I would say that there's rage and anger there between us. That was a lot of it was me. I think because my brain was short-circuited. I just had a much shorter fuse. And a lot of that, I mean, I haven't slammed a door since that house. I never slammed a door before I got to that house. Not once, not my whole life, right? But a separate question I think that you asked is, what happens like when one person is starting to deal with the issues of realizing you're in a toxic home and you need to move out and it's not safe for your family. Those are big realizations, and not everybody comes to them at the same time. And also sometimes the advice that you're getting is, well, we took it out of our daughter's wall, it's gone, we're done, we did it. Like, we're good, we just get some air scrubbers in and we're good. And I think that's where his mind was. And because that's what, I mean, honestly, that's what we were told at the time, like, we're done. And I was really, and I'm a litigator too. So I'm trying to get to the answer. Like, well, if there's this defect here, I had an expert come over and he really, I had two, and they really explained to me that if there's this defect here, it's probably likely that it's elsewhere in the house. And, you know, then the mama bear, I'm like a litigator and a mama bear at the same time, right? And so the mama bear gets amped up, and it's like, well, then I need to know like everywhere it is, you know? And so he walked around the perimeter of the house and he found that the house just wasn't flashed. Like literally was not, it was flashed in two places. And in the two places it was flashed, it was wrong. And the rest of the roof had no flashing. And that's because in my particular case, it has to do with how the plans were written. But this was I was the one talking to the experts. And so it took him a little while to kind of realize that I wasn't just flying off the handle again, right? So he admitted that on national television. I give him so much credit for that. I also though think that, look, it is, I think that the mold gets to people too, right? And when one spouse is having a hard time accepting it, I think it's partly that the mold is affecting their brain too. And we have to have extra grace. I wish that I had had some more grace at that time. Because the first time when we left our house, I was like, I'm taking these, we're leaving today and you can come if you want, but here's the address. I mean, I was like on a mission, and that's not a great way to like approach the situation. It's where I was at the time.
But when you're fighting for your life, and you are figuring out what's going on and you're the one that sees it and you are literally thinking, my kids could die from a neurological emergency if I do not get them out of this house. Once you put those pieces together and you're talking to someone who's like a brick wall and you cannot get through to them, packing up and leaving with your kids is about the only thing that you can do to save yourself and your kids.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. And that's like one thing that I want to say, Keely, like if you're in a house that's making you sick, it really could kill you. I mean, it's really impactful to me that the only other lawyer in my area who does this does wrongful death claims, because that's where this leads. So if your house is killing you, find a way to get out of the house. I mean, I'm so inspired by all the people who go and live in a tent, right? Like people find a way to leave because you have nothing without your health. And if it's making you sick, you got to go, you know? And yeah, it was the best thing that I've ever done. The best decision I've ever made for my family. And I know that everybody is in a different place in the journey, but I think that and I don't want to be gendered or anything, but because maybe men have this too, but I know that the mamas that I've spoken to have this innate mama bear instinct that's like, I gotta find out what's going on with my kids, and I'm gonna get to the bottom of it, and I mean, they're saving their family's life, like they are heroes. And I mean, these military mamas, I have walked with them in the halls of Congress, and I cannot tell you how inspiring they are. They're on a mission to like save our country, right? Because it starts with your own children, you're saving your family, but then that mama bear, I think, expands to like everybody else's children. And you just, you're like, and it's the best. Sometimes you have to, I mean, I had to leave. But the second time around, I have to say, when we had to leave our rental, I was just calmer. I took Evan out to lunch and I was like, I just want you to know that we have a problem in this house. And I know that because the same inspector who came to examine the HVAC at my other house, I got him to come look at this house, and it's the same problem. And I'm really, really sorry, but we are going to have to leave again, and I had more compassion because it's like a big deal to say you're going to have to leave a place.
This is something that Eric has said multiple times in the past, that it's going to be the mothers who are the driving force of change in this issue. And here we are. I'm not a mom, but what you just said is that you feel like a mama bear to others because you know what you went through, and you want to help people either A, get out of it and get well, or B, don't completely avoid it. Don't be that person where you think it's not going to affect you, and all of a sudden, everyone's mold raging each other in the house and everyone's sick, and you're like, oh, well, it got me, So we're all working hard together to try to fix this, and I'm just so happy that you came on today to just share with us your story and what you've done. And Eric and Keely, do you guys have any final questions for Kristina? All right, Kristina. So where can our audience find you if they are looking for a litigator to help them in their mold case?
So I called my law firm Just Well, and it was actually my husband who came up with the name. But I just want my clients to get well, and I just want to get well. And I really believe that the law allows for recovery for people who are sick to recover from the people who made them sick. And so that's what my law firm, my little law firm is. It's just, I represent sick families against the companies or the people that made them sick. And it's called Just Well Law. And we're based in Texas. And Bob McKee and I have just joined forces to consult on cases around the country. So we can help you even if you're not in Texas. We can take cases in Texas, and then I'm trying to build referral networks and partnerships with someone in every state. It's going to be, I'm brand new. This is a startup, so you have to have patience with us. But I want to build something that is able to help people in every single state. That is my goal. That's my vision. And I think we're going to get there with the team we have and the team we're building, and we're looking for partners. So if you've got an entrepreneurial personal injury lawyer, or any kind of lawyer, an entrepreneurial lawyer who wants to help in any state, I'd love to be connected to them. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just like so inspired by the three of you and the work that you have done in this field. I just think that you're giants, and you're literally changing the world and making it a safer place to live. And I'm in awe of you. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Kristina. I know Keely's tearing up over there, and she has been, and I'm gonna tear up too, because again, we're just trying to do what's best for the greater good. And it's really not about me or Eric or Keely. It's just about all of us coming together as a driving force and trying to make change and help people. And again, thank you so much, Kristina, for joining us today. It was such a wonderful conversation. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your story and just letting us know what you've done to turn this into an opportunity to help others. And we look forward to working with you again or partnering in some capacity in the future. We'd love to just figure something out in that regards. So everyone, please check us out on all podcasting platforms. Like, share, comment on our content. Check out our GoFundMe and Patreon pages. We just launched an educational group that is extremely low cost, $22 per month. You will have access to us and a lot of information that we'll have coming up in the future. So please check that out at Exposing Mold Education. It is on our website on the education tab. So thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Take care.